Join Chris and Suzanne Vester today on Faith, Family, Fulfillment as they lead discussions on creating a strong bond and having a loving relationship through Christian values. Guests on the show share insightful stories and ideas to enhance a positive family upbringing and create trust in one another, as well as providing encouraging words of wisdom everyone should hear. And now, here are Chris and Suzanne.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Faith, Family, and Fulfillment. I'm your co-host, Chris.
And I'm Suzanne.
And another solo episode today, talking about some things that I think need to be brought to the surface. And I think it's time to talk about them.
All right. Let's dive in.
Lord, thank you for this time today that we can come together and have conversations about things that a lot of people are not willing to talk about, whether it's fear, shame, stigma, whatever. And we know that 100% of the time, you're the answers to those problems. I ask that you lead and guide us in this conversation today and be with us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So you do some well-being coaching inside the organization. You've been doing that about a year now, right over a year. And I've been doing what we call leadership development for about a year and a half. And recently we brought on Corporate Chaplains of America. So our organization has a corporate chaplain. We have our own individual chaplain that comes around once a week and services our employees and their families in their time of need. And one of the main selling points for me when I sat down with corporate chaplains, didn't need a lot of selling in that actually, but just one of the biggest benefits and the eye on it all, like it's dotted the I for me, was when he gave me every 90 days, they'll give us a report of things that our employees might be struggling with or things they've had conversations about. And they've got that data throughout their organization, which is a huge organization. That's 1,500 employees that they're serving across the country. And when I looked at the list, that list was almost a direct reflection or a direct mirror of things that you have discovered in our organization. Again, that's a nationwide survey, but you send out anonymous surveys to people and say, hey, what are you struggling with? And when I saw his list, because I knew yours, because we talk about it inside the organization, I was like, man, it's not just us, but it's us. So it's nice to not know, like car business can kind of be crazy.
So it's nice to know you're somewhat in the scale of normal.
I always used to tease when we watched Jersey Shore, it made me feel more normal. Like when you see that issues that we're having in our organization or issues that people are struggling with inside our organization are not outliers. They are legitimately what our nation as a whole struggles with. Mm-hmm. And it was anxiety, depression, and stress management were the top three, which ironically enough were
the same top
three. And what I wanted to talk about today is, like, how do you help those that are in our organization deal with those? And I'm going to talk about a little bit how I've seen it through the leadership development of how those particular things play out in other areas when it comes to leading ourselves well. Because the whole idea of a leadership development is helping people or guiding people into becoming better leaders of themselves, because if they can lead themselves well, then they can lead others well. So when you're doing your group sessions, and I know you're bound by HIPAA, so you can't give names and that kind of specifics, but when people had come into those rooms and they're dealing with anxiety, depression, stress management, like what are the things that you point them towards when it comes to that?
We talk a lot about controlling the controllables, because a lot of people there's a spectrum of anxiety and depression. So this is certainly not an answer that is a one size fits all. But in most cases, anxiety is from overthinking, from feeling the overwhelm. And a lot of the things that are being thought about and is what are overwhelming them are things that they've created in their mind, not necessarily things that are concrete and tangible. So once you weed out the 99 out of 100 things that probably won't happen, you can say, okay, well, this one thing I can control. And you focus on really harnessing and controlling that one thing. And then you look to the next thing and the next and the next. But it's more about using your voice, speaking what you need, speaking what you're feeling, and getting perspective on that. A lot of people who come and sit with me one-on-one will talk about anxiety and depression. And by the time they leave, they say, man, that was really nice to talk about that. So I think far too often it's just we hold everything so close to the chest that we don't allow ourselves to become open to other people so that we don't have to carry it all. And that's it's a very short answer, but control the controllables, and cliche for a reason, but what isn't measured isn't managed. So what things happen around when you're feeling the overwhelming anxiety or the overwhelming depression are those things that you can pinpoint to. Yes, awesome. Can you eliminate them? Yes, great. Take them out of your life. And if not, how can you put them into a situation where you feel like you can manage them and manage them well so that they're not going to end up being the rock around your neck?
So the idea of pruning things, right?
It's essential. Right. It's hard.
Yes, because in the leadership development, and I'm not going to say that we talk specifically about anxiety, depression, stress management. With us, we just narrow it down to mental and spiritual, like those two spaces, your mental space and your spiritual space, and which one do they want to work on. But usually when we dive into it, it's about experiencing some type of uncontrollable emotional response, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is to almost 100% of the time an ability to handle stress. And then anxiety and depression is another thing. So in those situations, like one of the things I've learned, and I'm not working on a doctorate, right? But what I have learned is that your brain can't tell the difference between an imagined fear and what's actual, like what could happen versus, hey, this is a real life thing, just because that's how we're wired to look at danger.
Well, not only that, just to add into that, our chronic stress levels being so high keeps our body in that fight flight mode all the time. So not only can our brain not discern, our body doesn't know what to do. Is it just, do we get a really hateful email and we're automatically into that fight flight spiral? Or, is there a tiger running towards us? Our body is having that same response because we haven't learned how to modulate that.
Right. And that's been one of the most surprising takeaways for the majority of the people that just go through leadership development with me. Going through that example, like your body it can't tell the difference, between the two. It's the same. It's just go. Mm-hmm. And so how do you see it play out? Like we're talking about anxiety, depression, and stress management is pretty much, it's all mental acuity. It's mental, not acuity. It's mental health, right? Mm-hmm. How does that play out for body health? I mean, like, what have you seen as a byproduct of the mental state? Mm. What's happening physically?
So, in just dealing with stress, because if you understand that stress is probably at the top of the list, and not to minimize anxiety and depression, but a lot of times anxiety and depression is exacerbated by uncontrolled stress. So if you have uncontrolled stress in your life, not only does your body constantly stay in that adrenaline pumping mode, and that's terrible on your nervous receptors because obviously you're on go all the time. But when you have heightened levels of stress, you also have typically a higher resting heart rate. You typically have lower recovery with your sleep. You don't get good sleep cycles. Your digestion is interrupted. So people are, suffering from things like irritable bowel, for example. And it's because their body doesn't know how to digest and rest and do all the things that it's supposed to do. You may notice that you have heart palpitations. The list goes on to the point of like people get tinnitus in their ears, that ringing in their ears from heightened stress. So it's cascades. It's like a ripple. Like you have one thing that happens, and if you don't have a good stress adaptation, it just ripples out into everything. And then it flows into mood, which means you may bite the head off of somebody that did absolutely nothing to you, or just looked at you the wrong way, or didn't hold the door long enough, or just little bitty things. And you're going to snap.
So, you do it with a bunch of different methods. Again, you're trained in it. I always give them the disclosure. I'm not a doctor. I play one on TV.
You're not I'm not a therapist, a doctor. I have no credentials other than
life, right? But there are things that I've used in my life where I've come to see value in, and even like something as simple as cold exposure, and how using some type of cold exposure can help you understand how your body reacts to stress and get in control of it. And it's always been surprising. And a lot of the takeaways from the guys and girls, ladies that go through the group are like, man, I can't believe that like a cold shower can affect the rest of my day in a way that I don't get inflamed. I don't respond. I don't lash out. But it's because in the very first thing of the day, you've settled everything down and said to your body, hey, there's things that I can control and there's things that I can't, and recognizing the two,
And for sure, it gives you perspective on how your body is going to respond to something. Because I think when you have the cold exposure, for example, and you are uncomfortable, your body is telling you, get out, go. This is not good. You shouldn't be here. But when you sit in that and you realize, all right, it sucked. Like, let's just be real. It sucked. But I made it.
Right.
Not only is that giving you a little control over your stress response, but it's also giving you the confidence to do hard things. And I think far too frequently because we overthink and we end up creating scenarios that typically don't happen, that we don't allow ourselves the ability to and the confidence to do hard things, handle them, and then go on to the next thing. We don't allow ourselves to get uncomfortable and do hard. And if you don't get uncomfortable and do hard, how do you know what you're capable of if you're not allowing yourself to try those things? And as a caveat, I think you told your last group to start at, what did you tell them to start at with the cold shower?
See if you could do 10 seconds. It's like, just see, can you sit under it?
Okay, so
let's go a little more and a little more and a little more. And then eventually 5 minutes in an ice bath is the goal.
So I do it. I kind of recommend it in the reverse. Get in with the water cold enough that you don't like it, but not so cold that you want to jump back out. And then sit in that, count to 60. All right, awesome. You did that for the day. The next day, you got to start a little colder and a little colder and a little colder. So that way you're not just jumping in feet first, right? Because that's what you do. Jump first, then build your parachute.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the point of that was just get it done.
Yeah, get it done. And you said ripple effect, and that's what you'll see. It's the takeaways that a lot of the people that have completed the 24 weeks of leadership development, the takeaway is, man, this bled over into this, and it bled over into this, and it bled over.
Always does.
It always does. That's the whole idea of getting to where it's an integrated life. To me, it's an example of how just once you make the decision of who it is you're going to be, it bleeds over in everything. And then so when you start doing things like learning how to handle stress management and depression, anxiety, and again, you said it, it's not a one size fits all, but like, let's start. I heard something today, and it was, if you can't make mistakes, then you can't make decisions.
Sure.
The fear of making mistakes keeps you from making the decision. And I think that's where some of it stress comes from, is the inability to make a decision out of the fear of failure. One of the things that's been shared with, like I said, we've been doing this 1.5 years, and I've heard it multiple occasions, is like, I've always been taught that failure is failure. Don't fail. And I gave for years, or a year or more, the idea of this kaizen. It's a Japanese term for, our word for that would be failing forward. Toyota uses it in their production. So they take an assembly line, they get it going as fast as it possibly can, and then it'll break. And then they go where it broke, they fix it, and they turn it up, because that becomes the new baseline.
Right.
Stress management can be the same way. Like, what your baseline is, because your inability to handle it now means you're already redlining.
Right.
If they can identify what's manageable and what's something that they can control, and say, okay, well, where are you? And that's it. Here's your new baseline. Because it's not about the ability to avoid stress or avoid things that give you a depression or an anxiety reaction. It's about learning how to handle them, but learning where your baseline is first.
Absolutely. And I think too, part of what plays into people's inability to make a decision is they look at social media and they see people who are, and I'm going to use this in quotes, winning.
Right.
Because I mean, you can fake winning. I mean, all it takes is a good photographer and some good props. I mean, you can fake winning.
Right.
It doesn't mean you know anything. It doesn't mean you've done anything. But I think folks too frequently see that, or they might even see you or I and say, well, you know, you don't ever eat out. You have all your meals from home. You bring your lunch every day or whatever. What they don't realize is we've been doing that for nearly 30 years. And we've just figured out what worked for us.
Right.
There are plenty of things that we tried that we were like, yeah, no, that ain't working.
Right.
And just that words and just that tone of voice. But I think
maybe even more harsh than that.
It could have been more colorful.
Never again.
Yeah, not happening. But I think too often people are afraid to start because they know that on that first try, they're not going to be that person that they're aspiring to be, which I think comes back to, you know, creating, when we talk about it a lot, creating, what is your mission statement? What is your vision statement? What do you want to be? Okay, now where are you? All right, now what's the difference? Pick one and work on that. Because too often when people talk about anxiety, depression, and the cycles that kind of come with those things, they'll be doing really well. They're managing very well. They're making progress. They've got momentum. They've got good traction. And then something happens and they're in the ditch. And they forget all the good things that they put into practice and all the good things that were working well for them. And they sit and they go back to bad habits and they get comfortable. And then they come back and they're like, okay, what do I need to do? Well, what was working well before? Go do that.
Right.
Start there. It was working. Start there.
Go back to baseline.
Right.
Go back to the last baseline.
Right.
Which kind of carries you to one of the lessons I think we both learned. We did the year-long 70. We didn't do a 75 hard. We did the year of live hard.
Yes.
In 2020, the year
of crazy.
And you know, one of the takeaways from that is the ability to forgive yourself from failure and start over tomorrow.
Yes, day one.
Day one's tomorrow. And most of us as humans, we say, well, Monday's the beginning of the week. I'll start next Monday. Yes. And then they fail Tuesday afternoon and go, well, I'll start next Monday.
Yes.
Rather than, okay, well, tomorrow is another day. Mm-hmm. I got to go again tomorrow.
Right.
And that ability to self-forgive and understand what caused the failure. Was it in my control? Because sometimes it's not. You know, my discipleship group, we did 75 hard together, and a guy, twice he failed, and both times there was not a thing in the world he could do about it. It was a complete family emergency that caused him to miss. But guess what happened on the next morning?
It was day one.
He started over day one. And so he's always made fun of us. And he goes, y'all just did 75. I did 97, you know, because he had gotten some days in before the failure. Because in legitimate, he did, like he missed one little simple thing, but to
the point, that one little simple thing that you might miss could be that one thing that you need to do every single day for you to win every single day.
Right.
And if you're missing that one thing, that could be the linchpin.
Right. And he crushed it. I mean, he did an amazing job of it. But I think it's in taking a program like that, like a 75 hard or something, where you're intentionally putting yourself in situations where you have to mark the wins and you have to recognize when you're doing well. And because I think we don't do enough of that either. You know,
for sure. Because you have to celebrate what you got right. I mean, you have to. I have long ago stopped asking people how they're doing. If I approach someone now, then if you've never met me before, you won't know. But most people can expect, I'm going to ask them, hey, what's new and good? I want you to focus on what's propelling you forward, because the bad, the unhappiness, the unsettledness, man, that's so temporal. You could be better in 10 minutes. I don't want to have to come back in 10 minutes and ask you how you're doing. Nor do I want to sit in the ditch with you for a long time. But to your point, no, we don't celebrate the wins nearly enough. You know, I sent out, a lot of recipes over the last couple of weeks for people who just want better options. I want to cook at home more, feed my family better, or whatever. The best email in the world I can get is somebody to say, hey, that was really good. Awesome. Count that as a win. Tomorrow might not be the same.
Right.
You might not get a good response from your family the next time you try something new. Celebrate that. That's good. Keep it.
And I think the second best email you could get was that sucked.
Absolutely.
Because and I want everybody to hear that. It's like, okay, well, I checked that box. That doesn't work. What's a different recipe?
Mm-hmm.
Help me. Right. But please don't send me that one again.
Right.
That's a good email.
Yeah.
It's finding out what you don't like. Yeah. You may be listening to this if you listen to other episodes and go, okay, well, this is supposed to be fake family fulfillment. And all I'm hearing about is how to manage my stress and how not to be depressed and how to deal with anxiety. And what's that got to do with the other? Well, so for me personally, the stress part of it and the faith part of it go hand in hand, recognizing that, you use the term things that you can control. And there are things for sure that we can control. But the things that we can control, if we recognize that there is someone in control, that development of the faith muscle of, I know there's a sovereign plan and it's going to be okay. That's that's a daunting task to develop that muscle, or it can be.
And that's a pretty big missing piece of the puzzle a lot of times too, because there is, and I call it just, you can call them pillars, you can call them pieces of the puzzle, you can call them any one of many things. I call them primary foods. And one of the primary foods is spirituality. And when someone that is working with me doesn't have a spiritual practice, either because it's not been exposed to them, or they had an experience they didn't like it, or they've just gotten out of the habit, too busy, whatever. That's a big part of it. You have to be connected to something bigger than you, or else you feel like you have to carry everything. And you can't. You're not built to. That's not how we're made.
Yes. Amen. It's almost like you want to say to that person, man, the world's got to be heavy.
And I do sometimes.
Right. It's got to be heavy to you.
I mean, because I'll ask, what do you feel like you can offload? You're carrying all these different things around every single day. What can you offload? And the things that they can't offload, okay, now what are you going to do with those?
Right.
Who are you going to give them to?
Right.
Because they're not yours to carry. So where are they going to go? Which, to your point, leads to a lot of faith conversations.
Right. It's about faith conversations. I used to say, well, some sneaky Jesus. Well, they ain't sneaky no more.
No.
They know they get in the room with me, I'm gonna drop the Jesus bomb on them at some point. But okay, well, if that's the faith part of it, the faith element is, hey, there's got to be something larger than me. The next piece would be family. And I said, in the leadership development part of it, the overwhelming thing with the people that complete the work, they go, man, I can't believe how much one bleeds into the other. We work on their calibration, which is mental and spiritual. We work on their physical well-being, their how they show up conditionally. They work on some type of a relationship for 12 weeks and then another relationship for the second 12 weeks without letting go of the first one. So they're learning to juggle like their core relationships. And then like in their community, how they show up, how do they handle or how they show up for their family, how they show up at their job, how they show up in their like their church, wherever. It's just what contribution are they making. But what they see is, like, in some cases, people that have been working on a relationship ended up doing relationship, and they brought that relationship into how they were serving the community. And then all of a sudden, the one they were working on a relationship with, which is showing up with them in the community, is now doing their conditioning with them. Right. And it all flows into their mental space. It's just one flows into the other. Same thing with this. If you have the inability to handle stress, most stress comes from either finances or work, or the result of lack of finances because of work. At least that's what I'm hearing when I talk to them. Then that definitely will flow into the home, into the family. But if you can learn to even show up as an example of how to handle stress well, that could bleed over into how the family performs as a unit. How you and the spouse form the relationship and handle things together, like learning how to handle the stressors like not handle it yourself, but learning to manage it yourself, learning to what you've got to do to manage it. There's going to be a way that you show up differently than you were before you couldn't manage.
For sure.
Which leads to conversations, which could lead to the spouse observing the same thing and going about the same processes. And like the whole family unit is going to benefit from just one person learning how to manage stress.
Sure. And that leads into a fulfillment in every space.
Right.
It's not about doing everything perfectly. It's about doing it a little bit better than yesterday.
Right.
So if you're showing up a little better than you did yesterday, you're doing a little more work than you did yesterday, you're staying uncomfortable a little longer than you did yesterday, you're making one better decision today than you did yesterday, those multiply over time. They compound. So they build, they stack, they grow into really big things.
Yeah. And when you said something that struck something to me about, the power of one more, it's Ed Milet's got a great book right now. That's actually what it's called, is the Power of One More. It's an amazing book, but it speaks directly to that. It's just, hey, it's how are you developing more than you were yesterday, just with one more? And it bleeds into every aspect. And one of those is one more prayer. Like that's one of its chapters. So it goes back to the faith part of it. So you're the one who actually has the letters behind your name. I'm just the guy who plays the doctor on TV. Right. So what advice or what's the biggest takeaways that you have seen do the most amount of good for people that you've dealt with, whether in mass scale with classes or in the one-on-one individuals?
I think getting really clear on what you want, what you need, and what you value is really important. Because a lot of times what we think we need are actually wants that are just showing up because they're the hole and we don't have anywhere to fill it. But if you can get really clear on what you want, what you need, and what you value, then you can get really clear on where you need to place some energy and really pour into one or more spaces. Talk to somebody. It doesn't have to be somebody who's credentialed. Just get it out. You can let things ping pong in your brain to the point where you're no good to anyone. I tell people a lot, and actually we talked about this on our last episode. Our phones are amazing devices for just verbal vomit. Just record the message. If you want to put it in a document so you can read it later, awesome. But the best thing that you can do is just not let it sit and stew, because the longer you let it sit, the more ideas you're going to come up with of things that will probably not ever happen. You're going to think about the negative, because what your thoughts turn into things. We talked about that not long ago too. And if your thinking is not in a good place, it's going to create things that are not in a good place. So you have to shift. So know what you want, need, and value. Understand that your thoughts definitely turn into things, and make sure that you're yielding fruit that is what you're wanting and what you're valuing and what you're needing. Because if you're in a negative mindset, you're only going to see the negative. If you look for enough problems, you will find plenty.
True.
Whereas if you're looking for things that are good, that are positive, that are encouraging and edifying, you're going to find those too. And you're going to bring more of that, whichever one you go, into your life. So you just have to do some hard evaluating. And it's never good to do that by yourself.
Amen. And I'll say, for those out there that are listening that have anything to do with leadership in a business, I told you on the beginning of this that we had just recently brought in corporate chaplains into our organization. I would recommend, if you don't have someone doing well-being, and even if you do, right,
It's a great compliment.
it's the complement of the two, where they can have some security that everything is confidential, and they can have those hard discussions and learn to deal with depression, anxiety, and all that. And it's all permission based. I think it's of a huge value.
And while it's not a substitution for other types of care that you might be receiving, you can never have too many opportunities.
Absolutely. And so the last thing I want to say is we're actually recording this episode on our 26th wedding anniversary.
Long time.
Oh my gosh. We've been together. In fact, this coming Sunday will be 29 years from our first date. And I just want to honor you.
For putting up with you.
Yes.
So we talked about failing forward.
Right. We fell forward a lot. I fell. Well, I hope it's forward. We got to 26.
Right.
In fact, I walked in this morning. I told Stephanie, if I can make it to around 7 o'clock, I mean, I'm officially married 26 years. If we make it to 7 o'clock. But how you show up to our girls, the way you take care of me, the way you lead yourself, like I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I love you.
Love you too.
Kiss.
Sure.
Gross everybody out on YouTube.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for listening today, and I'll pray us out.
All right.
Lord, thank you for this opportunity for us to just kind of talk about things that need to be talked about, and then pointing to the fact that putting you at the center of all those things leads to the best solution. It's not every day that we can sit and have these kind of conversations and reach an audience that everybody needs to hear it. And I'm just appreciate the fact of the guidance and the way you led the conversation. And I hope that in all this story, you get the glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Faith, Family, Fulfillment, brought to you by Chris and Suzanne Vester. We hope you enjoyed listening to this week's guests and stories. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow Chris and Suzanne on Instagram at HVAUTOCOO and Suzanne.c.Vester. That's at SUZANNE.c.VESTER.